Hey, this is Alex Shaw, and you're listening to The Soul of Life.
It may be hard to imagine now, but not long ago, coffee shops didn't exist.
When we opened, there was no other coffee shop doing what we were doing in Georgetown. There's only maybe one or two other in Washington, D.C.
Coffee in America before the Starbucks era was about being cheap, uniform, and plentiful. Think of the free refills at diners.
Mass producing coffee that, kind of just tastes like uniform, that has no flavor characteristics. You need to pour a ton of milk and sugar. That's the coffee that we were drinking in America up until, the 90s.
Then bean roasters like Pete's in the Northwest started distributing gourmet roasted coffee, giving rise to an expanding palette of coffee quality and tastes.
Coffee that wasn't just Folgers.
Today on The Soul of Life, I speak to Tessa Velazquez, one part of the family that has owned and operated a coffee shop and bakery in Georgetown for 20 years. Baked and Wired is the Velazquez's first store, started by Tessa's parents, Tony and Theresa.
My parents opened Baked and Wired in April of 01.
More recently, the family opened a baked joint on the other side of downtown DC, followed by their first restaurant, A La Betty, next door.
Zach and I, my older brother, we were kids. We grew up in this shop. Of course, I was a kid, but I was always in the back. I was always making stuff. I was rolling cookie dough balls. I was, my first job was at the register.
We talk about how Tessa's family has been able to stay open during the pandemic, which has devastated other local businesses.
Of course, sales are down, but not as down as we thought they'd be.
Tessa shares her recipe for the stress of not just being in a food service business, but doing it with family.
And when we butt heads, we also just learn to be incredibly honest. And yeah, of course it gets difficult sometimes. We're all different people. At the end of the day, we're all very passionate about this.
We talk about stress baking during the pandemic. And one of my favorite recipes from Tessa's baking blog. You have to talk about your lemon Bluebee pound cake. You've invented a word here. I'm interested in the story.
I have the basic pound cake recipe that my mom actually started with, that she has substituted and made all of her different pound cakes with.
And dive into the subject of flour and the growing enlightenment in this country about the health problems with industrialized versions.
If any of us have been fortunate to go to Europe, go to France, why are these people, they're eating bread all the time? They're not fat. They look amazing.
Tessa reveals the secrets of her brother's passion for brewing coffee with a rare customized machine he calls the Slayer.
We have full control over the whole brewing process. No one else has this machine but us.
Welcome to episode 9 of The Soul of Life. I'm Keith Miller, and this is Baked and Wired, DC's Velazquez family, celebrating 20 years in business. I'm Keith Miller, and my podcast, The Soul of Life, is here to help you remember who you really are. I'll bring together people who have gotten off their treadmills. I'll have conversations with athletes, musicians, doctors, scientists, healers, and entrepreneurs to discuss the fascinating edges of our knowledge in neurobiology, psychology, and physics. This is The Soul of Life.
Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for season 2.
Americans, and particularly Washingtonians, love their coffee and they love cafes. You only have to look at the monopoly that Starbucks has created worldwide to see this phenomenon. But is the era of big coffee over? That's the question I'm posing today. Is it possible that artisanal boutique coffee shops could be clawing back into the Green Giant's market share, the way craft breweries have surprised behemoth beverage conglomerates? That's where the Velazquez family has a unique edge. With their locally beloved coffee outposts, Baked and Wired, located in the Georgetown neighborhood, and a baked joint situated near Chinatown, they have shown over their 20 years of growth that their personal touches can be very successful in a crowded market. In 2019, the Velazquez family, Tony and Theresa, and their adult children, Tessa and Zak, opened La Betty, restaurant next door to a baked joint. Today, Tessa Velazquez joins me on The Soul of Life to talk about their success taking a stab at big coffee in this caffeine-fueled city, surviving as a boutique cafe and restaurant during the pandemic. And of course, we'll talk about some of your favorite things like baking and bread and flour and sweets and our relationship to the work that we do and the art of food. Tessa Velazquez, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks, Keith. So great to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, tell me a little bit about your family. And it's as I've gotten to know about your restaurants and your stores, it's been interesting to see that this is a family-run business for 20 years and it's been successful. So tell me about the story of how you got started in your family.
Sure. Yeah. Baked and Wired is turning 20 in April. We all can't even believe that. It's been
Congrats.
a long run. Thank you. So my parents opened Baked and Wired in '01, in April of '01. And Zach and I, my older brother, we were kids, and we grew up in the shop. And the story behind it was my parents had always worked in Georgetown. My dad is an architect by trade, and he had a firm in Georgetown just up the street. And my mom worked in the office as well. And that's how they met. And they've always worked together, always worked in Georgetown. And then they opened a little copy graphic shop called Zap in the same place where Baked and Wired is now. And they did that for many years. They knew Georgetown. They worked there. They spent so much time there. And they were just seeing there was no place to get a good cup of coffee. And actually Starbucks was starting around that time. More importantly, there was no place to get a good baked good. It was still getting like the cellophane wrap baked good from Costco. You know, it was no one was doing homemade baked goods in Georgetown. And everyone they talked to was like, where are we going to go? We want to get coffee. We want to get baked goods. And so my mom grew up baking for her big family, and my dad's always just been very entrepreneurial and always grew up drinking coffee in his house since he was a little kid. And so with no background, with no restaurant experience, with, it wasn't even some lifelong dream to open a bakery someday. They were just kind of like, let's do it. Let's open it within Zap. At that point, in the late 90s, early 2000s, people were starting to get that equipment in their offices as well. So that kind of business was going down a little bit. It was kind of getting over its heyday, and they were looking for their next venture. So it all kind of was the perfect storm to open Baked and Wired, which was actually, if you're familiar with Baked and Wired, there's kind of the bake side and the wired side. All of Baked and Wired was just in the wired side where you get your coffee. That was where everything went. And it kind of explains a lot of how the menu is the way it is too, because it needed to be really like grab and go stuff. It was all takeout. It was really just catered to the office people. It closed at 5 or 6 p.m. It wasn't open on weekdays, and just kind of naturally, organically grew to be open longer hours, be open on the weekends, to have tourists come. Like none of that was expected. It was really meant to be for the office people like my mom and dad, and get them caffeine and get them a baked good after their lunch and send them on their way. And it just really organically evolved. So it's been a really cool journey to grow up in that for my brother and I, and be along for the journey and help open the second location of Bake Joint 5 years ago, and then open La Betty, our restaurant. So 20 years of in a way working together. Yes, of course, I was a kid, but I was always in the back. I was always making stuff. I was rolling cookie dough balls. I was, my first job was at the register, learned to be a barista, learned to be a manager. So everything I've learned has
You've
been
kind of
through
done
these
it all,
businesses.
right?
I've washed dishes. I've done everything. I've been a tech support. I've been, taking special orders. I've been in the kitchen, everything. So
and that's the thing that's so impressive. I think after 20 years, I walked in today at lunch and got a quiche and got a whole bunch of things that I enjoyed this afternoon. My stomach's going to be growling by the time we're done with this, because I'm going to want to go finish that quiche. But you're busy with an issue that came up. And so your dad's there. I was chatting with him, with Tony, and asking him about what's going on. And you're all right there. You're very accessible. Everyone's, so it's really, you're putting yourself out there. You studied, what did you study in school? And when did you decide that you were going to stay in the business?
Sure. Yeah. So, I grew up, like I was saying, all in Baked Wired. All my jobs were there. I went to Boston University. I studied psychology. I think that really rooted my whole life. I was running around the shops. I was very customer facing. I loved interacting with people. So I knew there was something with people, helping people. I loved that aspect of working there. And I'd come back every summer, of course, and work. I had jobs in Boston working at coffee shops. I loved it. I loved being in those shops. I loved making coffee. I loved talking to new people, making friends that way. And I graduated, and the next step for me was, do I go to grad school? What kind of grad school? Am I going for a PhD? Am I going to be out in school? Which is kind of what I was thinking at the time. I wanted a PhD. I was going to be in school for, like 7+ years, or any grad school, several years of my life to dedicate. I was young and I was like, I've always loved these businesses. Why don't I just move back to DC, try it out, learn small business? If I don't like it in a year, I'll go to school. Great. I tried it. And that was almost 10 years ago. So
Here you are.
I loved it. And, I tell people psychology was a big part in that too. It was really cool learning more about people. It's such a people business. Yes, we're selling food, but we're selling experience. We're selling customer service. It's in the back end, it's dealing with a lot of different types of people. All types of people work at coffee shops. All types of people work at bakeries, and all types of people come in and purchase from bakeries. So it's like learning how to talk to those people. And so I really
These are things you can't always learn in business school somewhere.
Exactly. So it was really, when I look back at that, it made sense that I went to study psychology because of how I grew up. And then it made sense that I went back and did what I did because I really took those skills and personal skills and understanding people and empathy and all those skills you really need I think, to be a good leader. And especially this type of business where you're just dealing with so many different type of people, and how to really, effectively talk to them and lead and empathize. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and we can dig into that a little bit today as far as how you operate, kind of the ethos and the values in your company and also your family. We're going to get to sort of how you deal with stress in the family. And that's not an easy thing to deal with over time. But
that'll be a fun topic. Yeah.
That's an interesting question to ask. But, how are you doing during COVID? A lot of restaurants have closed. I think restaurants have been one of the most, if not the hardest hit for sure. Yeah. And in coffee shops, especially when you're depending on people to come in, not just get it and go, but people aren't even coming into their offices. They're just starting to come back now. And you're in a busy place in Georgetown where there's a lot of foot traffic during the day, a lot of street traffic coming in and out. And if people aren't going out, they're not coming in, right? So how are you dealing with it?
It's been interesting. It's been a real testament to the community I think we've built in Washington. You're right. I mean, our weekday was really centered around Georgetown. I think not many people would know, but there's a lot of office buildings. Most people think Georgetown, oh, cute, I'm going to go walk around there. But weekdays with all of our regular customers who work in the neighborhood, who come in twice a day. Weekends were all tourists, people coming into Washington, D.C., and the lines out the door, people at least who live, outside the city, or this is their special trip. So we had no idea what to expect, but we have been, of course, sales are down, but not as down as we thought they'd be. And just the people who rely on this kind of food as nurturing and as comfort and as a way to show love.
I did an episode a little while ago on recreational drug use, so MDMA, and I'm going to do one on marijuana coming up. And I was just curious about if there's any double entendre intended in baked and wired, and then you've got a baked joint, and then you've got the name of some of your food. What's it called? Crack for hippies.
Yep.
Got the drug theme going.
You got our little subtle cue there. Yeah, it really just started as a very playful. I mean, and this was really when we started kind of playing with this. Baked and wired is really, of course, like just baked goods,
Sure.
And wired. And then it wasn't until later, and maybe it was honestly when I was a teenager, and I was like, oh, that's funny, like get baked, and they in playing on the marijuana aspect of it. And we actually have Get Baked trademark, if you can believe it. So Get Baked is one of our logos. So it's always been part of the fun. This was also during a time now it's more widely talked about, and people are really exploring and accepting the medicinal effects of a lot of psychedelic drugs and definitely marijuana. But at that time, it was really tongue in cheek. So that was our way of just like pushing the boundaries, being playful.
But to be clear, people are not coming for baked brownies with something special in the ingredients.
No. We still get people a couple times a year who actually do come and say they want that. And we have to explain to them that we don't actually have those, but that the brownies are so good that you'll feel your high, even though there's nothing in them.
There you go. And maybe if you open a location in Asheville, North Carolina, maybe you could get that done somehow. Yeah. I don't know. Back to the food and restaurant. Do you think the era of Starbucks is over?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it has its place. It has it's dependable. It's reliable. You go in, you know exactly what you're getting. you need that caffeine boost, go for it. But I do think it's been very cool seeing the third wave coffee really take over. So, like I said, when Baked and Wired opened, I think Starbucks was, so much credit to Starbucks for this, was the first wave of third wave coffee, of getting coffee that wasn't just Folgers.
And say
and
more about
now-
that term if you can.
Oh,
The
sure.
third wave.
Oh, yes, sure. So third wave coffee is really using source beans that are and actually been roasted, and using from a specific company, and roasting it and getting the right flavors out, not just mass producing coffee that, kind of just tastes like uniform, that has no flavor characteristics. You pour a ton of milk and sugar. That's the coffee that we were drinking in America up until, the 90s, and really exploded in the early 2000s. So like in the, around 2000, when we opened Baked and Wired, really started to come up. So like I'd say 2003 to 2010 is that getting to be more popular. And now, of course, to what you're pointing out, that's everywhere. There's coffee shops everywhere. When we opened, there was no other coffee shop doing what we were doing in Georgetown. There's only maybe one or two other in Washington, D.C. That we were looking to for inspiration as well. So it is a new era. I think what people's flavor palettes have developed, if you like coffee, you're going to one of these coffee shops because you really want to taste the coffee.
Right.
Starbucks, you're not really, it's just, it's going to do the trick,
High octane.
And exactly. You're going to go, you're going to get it, you're going to get your order. If you really like a sweet drink and you want to have the, Frappuccino with the whipped cream, great. Like you want to have a pumpkin. Exactly. But if you really like coffee, which more people have been way more interested in coffee, you're going to go to one of these shops like ours. And if you're looking for the personal experience, coffee shops are such a community hub, which is another reason that Baked and Wired opened, and that we opened then a bake joint 15 years later, was because it is so naturally a place that people over the test of time have come to a coffee or a tea house or a bakery to gather, to meet, to create ideas, to have interactions, to have dates, to have, to study, to do everything together, to hear music, to meet new people.
Right.
And so, you're getting definitely more of that at a place like Baked and Wired than a Starbucks too. So if you're looking for that, and I think people still at their heart are, and I think another thing COVID has taught me is that people are still, miss that. They crave it. Even if they're not going to the office, at least they were seeing their barista every day who knows their drink, who makes it. It's like, that's what you're getting at someplace like ours. I don't think Starbucks is going away. I think, you're going to need your fix. We can't open a Baked and Wired in an airport. I don't want to. So like, great. You can go get your coffee. I'll probably get a Starbucks. Yeah. Once every 2 years, I get a Starbucks.
Sounds like you're saying you've ridden the wave that Starbucks has brought over this country and then the globe, in fact. The U.S. being late to catch up, I suppose, from Europe and the connoisseurs of coffee. But what kinds of coffee do you have? And can you kind of walk me through what the choices would be if somebody walks in?
Sure. What makes Baked and Wired and Joint very unique is that we are a multi-roaster shop, meaning while we do not roast our own beans, which is another amazing, huge whole operation that shops have been doing more themselves, which is awesome. We don't roast our own beans, but we are multi-roaster shop. So we are getting multiple roasters. So we're getting Intelligentsia out of Chicago. We've been using them for probably 6, 7, 8 years, I'd say. We are doing Blueprint out of St. Louis. We are doing Mountain Air out of Asheville. We are doing Sweet Bloom out of Denver. We are doing Cafe Integral out of New York. And we're doing Lost Sock right here out of Washington, D.C. And my brother is the one who heads the coffee program. So he has this amazing palate. He's always tasting new coffees. He's always switching them out. So we have that right now, but we change it every few months. So we might keep some staples, but we also are getting new ones in. We do this way because a couple of reasons. One, we hire and train baristas who this is not just some part-time job they do while they're getting a degree. This is their career. This is as a sommelier is to wine. This is how we have our baristas. They are professionals and they love coffee and they breathe it and they love it. And how boring would it be for you to just dial in the same and taste and and prepare the same exact coffee every single day. It's so boring, right? So we have all these different coffees because actually for each coffee, they need to adjust the settings. They need to adjust the water flow. They need to adjust the grind, all of this to make that particular coffee taste good. So it's very engaging.
Wow.
You're tasting and you're changing.
Yeah.
That's what makes really good coffee is adjusting it. That's also according to the weather. On a humid day, you're going to have to adjust it a different way compared to a very cold day. Like today's a very cold day and it's going to constrict more. So
Now that reminds me. Tell me about Zak and the Slayer. What is that? I've heard
Zak
about
and the
this.
Slayer. So we have a very fancy, amazing espresso machine called the Slayer, which is out of Portland, and it is all a completely custom machine. What we have at Baked Noir is what most shops have. We have a La Marzocco, which is a semi-automatic machine. So if you look in the back, we still have to do everything by hand, but we're also pressing a button at the end of the day that pulls the water through. What's different about the Slayer, first of all, it looks cool. Like Zak picked out all the fixing, has these cool wooden handles. You got to pick out all the colors. No one else has this machine but us.
We're going to get a picture. We'll put that up.
Yeah, cool. And he had to go there to learn how to work it. There's no technicians even. Whereas most of these espresso machines, because it's so popular now, you call someone, you have an issue. This, you really have to know how to work the machine. And that's Zak. If it breaks down, no one's coming to fix it because we're the only one who has it. And there's a couple of these around DC as well. Once you know, you'll notice. But what's cool about this one is we have full control over the whole brewing process. So we control exactly when we let more water in, how much of it is dripping out at a time. So we have a full control, which makes it very tricky to work with, but also very exciting if you are a coffee professional because you have that control. You can make it taste even better because it's not a one size fits all. It's really then super unique to each coffee. And how the baristas look at that is so many metrics. There's weight, there's time, and it's a visual process, it's a tasting process.
It's human, very human, right?
Taking it's very the human
machine out of it, and even the computer.
Yeah, even within this nice machine, it's not nice because it's doing everything for you. It's actually nice because it's giving you the freedom to make all these choices yourself.
Changes.
The computer, exactly, you're going to have the same. It's like it's not going to taste great. It's going to give you the caffeine. Not going to taste the same.
And then to your point about people are always going to want a human product. Right. So something that a human touched, and whether it's handmade goods, it reminds me of how the beer industry, the Goliaths like Anheuser-Busch, InBev, and Miller Coors, I don't know if they saw this wave coming, like over the last 10 and 15 years of craft breweries, like taking away a big chunk of their market share because people like you guys, if we kind of run the parallel here, individual breweries are popping up saying, we want to devote our life to making a specific kind of flavor. That's something that a big corporate company is not necessarily interested in.
Right, exactly. It's that personal touch, and it definitely I think on a customer base, obviously tastes good, but if you can see how much care they're putting into it, it makes you feel good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about work-life separation. As you work with your family all the time, and your mom. Tell me about your mom. Tell me who does what. Zak. Zak is running the coffee program. What does your mom do, and what does everybody do?
Yeah. So Zak is running the coffee program, hiring the baristas, choosing the beans, doing the repairs, all of that. And he's also very much, a manager and an owner too. So we all make these like visions for the company. Those decisions are all made together as a family. And my dad is effective. We don't use titles, but effective CEO. So he he's the money guy. He makes all the the major business decisions. My mom, it's all of her recipes. So she's the head cooker of all locations. So it's all of her recipes for Baked Wired, all of her recipes for Baked Joint, and all of her recipes for La Betty. So she is really in the back of house in the kitchen. So today, even it just so happened my whole family was at Baked Wired when he stopped in. My mom was actually in our commissary kitchen, which is in Virginia, where we actually make everything, and she was in there. Still, she's in the kitchen still. I mean, we have a team and she oversees it, but she's still very involved in all the kitchens and making sure that everything's coming out perfectly.
And what's it like working with these people over time? I'm sure people change over time, right? That's true in marriage. That's true in anything. How do you guys handle I can't imagine you agree on everything. How do you guys handle
No,
a
yeah,
tough conversation.
it's interesting. I mean, it's good because we all kind of do our own thing. And I guess I should touch on too, I'm more like operations. So, whatever needs to be done, I'm kind of filling in the cracks in a lot of ways. So, operations and training and hiring important staff and tech and, all of that, website, social media oversight, events, like blah, blah, blah.
Credit card machine goes down. That's you.
Exactly. So it's great. We all kind of do our own thing, which I think is important in any business partnership. But when it comes to making the big decisions, I mean, there's two sides. One, that we trust each other immensely. So we're working with our family, people that have a lot of trust, and that sort of dynamic has been lost over time, for the reasons where it gets tough, of course. But we have that trust, so we know we're all in it to make this place better. And when we butt heads, we also just learn to be incredibly honest, right? And incredibly honest of how we feel, how we think it's going to work. How should we make a decision? Having meetings, that sort of thing are things we've had to develop on the way, because when you're family, you just kind of talk about it at the dinner table, or, we've had to learn those things throughout time. Right. And yeah, of course it gets difficult sometimes. We're all different people. At the end of the day, we're all very passionate about this. We all want it to succeed. And we all very different people too, very different personality types. So, with that, we all know each other's personalities. So I think you learn to really how to broach a subject with someone in the tone, in the communication style that's good for them. When to draw the line and put your foot down. When someone's just had a hard day, and that's where we're good at family. So they're having a hard day, they need to be left alone for a little bit, or like those sort of things. Like, it plays into each other and it being tough.
I was looking at the research recently on substance abuse risk, because that's my field, mental health. And it's funny, like, it's not funny, but like the highest risk group is mining. Like mineral extraction, people who are in like digging a hole all day, like they're highest at risk. Right next to them is people who work in a restaurant.
There you go.
Risk factors. I mean, you're constantly putting someone else first. You're constantly pleasing someone else. The customer has to be right. Your boss has to be right. Making food just right. If people have watched these food shows and how much pressure can be in those kitchens. People like Anthony Bourdain kind of popularized this in his writing, like sort of behind the scenes, the sexism, the racism, the macho used to be really, I think, a men's world. Increasingly now it's more, you would know more about this, but from what I've read, there's more like 50-50 men and women coming into culinary schools now, but even pastry chefs has always been apparently mostly women. So what changes are you seeing over the 20 years in kind of the work pool?
Yeah, it's so interesting growing up in this and seeing, I'm fortunate to have grown up seeing a very strong woman, my mother, as a role model for leading business. All that stuff is real. All of those things are real. And I think as I've been reflecting on this topic you're broaching, I think there's a couple things that have come up that we're really on this new frontier for not only, yes, technically women coming, but a different type of leadership style as well, that will be less toxic. So what I mean is, one, I see Me Too, and I see how hard that hit the restaurant industry. Yes, with on the high end, the amount of sexual harassment and abuse happening, but as you're pointing out about Anthony Bourdain, it's a power thing in the toxic environments there. And that's why people are addicted to drugs, are drinking, why it's such a horrible environment. Because exactly what you're saying, you're working in you're working in hot kitchens, you're working in the corner of a basement over a stove, being yelled at for a 12, 14-hour shift. You're doing that every single night, but one day a week. And someone's yelling at you constantly, and that's been glorified. And yeah, those are men who are perpetuating that toxic environment. So in Me Too, it kind of brought down, yes, the sexual aspect of it, but also just the harassment and the abuse. And so you have that kind of right before COVID. What's COVID hurting? It's hurting the mostly in the food business and is the bars and the fine dining, or the more of like the dining hall restaurant scene, where most of this toxic behavior is happening. So then what I think is happening too, if you haven't closed, if you haven't adjusted, all these people who've unfortunately, sadly been furloughed, laid off, and you're reading articles about them now who are starting to like make their own businesses, been so cool. are they really going to want to go back to that place where that person yelled at them, where that person made them work 12 hours? Or they realize through this that they can have work-life balance, that they can work hard, they can be creative. They don't have to have someone yelling at them. They don't have to work over a hot stove for 12 hours. I just think this is really going to change the game. And I think
it's been such a disruptor, right? Everyone's gotten out of their normal roles they play.
Yes, exactly. And I just cannot see the restaurant experience going back to that same way. Yes, will people eventually be back in dining rooms, a full dining room, ordering dinner, sitting next to, all their friends without masks? Yes, I totally see that's going to happen. I just think from the top down, it's going to look different, and it's going to be more of a feminine leadership style. Yes, you meet your man or your whatever. You're not necessarily a woman, but the empathy is there. We've gone through this
empathy and compassion and presence and listening to people.
Yes, exactly.
Accepting influence. I mean, that's in my field, we know scientifically, because we've studied marriage longitudinally for like decades now, since the 70s, 80s. And we know that marriages will succeed. And one single factor is basically shown to you can kind of sample the marriage and kind of predict, or at least there's some people who go out on a limb and say you can predict whether that marriage will be around in 10 years. If the man, and this is sort of a, it's a stereotypical, it's not inclusive necessarily sample set, but if the man is able to accept influence from the female in the relationship, then you can predict. So if he has the ability to empathize and listen and on important decisions, not just like little things. So it's interesting.
That's so fascinating. And that's these people you're working with, especially in food, or you might as well be married to them. You're with them all the time.
Have you ever entertained Hollywood, or I shouldn't say, I guess just Hollywood, but television or film? Because one of my favorite shows is called Chef's Table. Are you familiar with that? On Netflix? Yes.
Love that show.
The cinematography of food is, I mean, they take it to a beautiful new level, right? But also the way they craft the stories of each chef or baker, and go into detail on some of the personalities. And some of them, it's really ego-driven. It's about perfection, and you can see their life is a tightrope. It's sort of an Anthony Bourdain story. And others, they're just like, they're picking mushrooms in the morning, and they're going through the market, and then they'll see what they want to make in the afternoon. Have you ever considered that sort of thing? Or are you happy with sort of keeping a low profile?
Not really. I mean, when when Food Network was a big thing, like we've always been approached to do those like cupcake challenge or, this. And we've always been very guarded. We really are. It's not an image. We are like a family DC institution. And we're careful with that. So, I mean, something like Chef's Table, great. Yeah. If you know them, like, have them call me. That would be wonderful. But
I would love to watch that episode. It's such a great story.
Right.
This leads me to the second part of the conversation I want to have with you is about the food itself.
Great.
I'll start off with a question. I mean, when I go into Starbucks or when I see the pastries that are in your shop, especially muffins. I make muffins like 3 times, probably every other week. If it's bananas, I freeze the bananas and have them laying around, or blueberries. We're going to talk about, hopefully talk about your blueberry bread and pound cake. But I always wonder, how do you get, and I've never done it really, how do you get the rise out of muffins that you see often in pastry shops?
Wow.
Please take the time now to subscribe to The Soul of Life wherever you're listening. Give it a thumbs up or write a positive review. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing episodes planned for season 2.
I mean, the difference is, I think, really is we have good ovens. It is so hard for a home baker. Like, we have commercial ovens that we actually know the temperature that it's in there. We have fans, we have all these more of the technique that we can actually bake it. We have better usually equipment to bake it in, all of those things, and maybe better ingredients as well, than the store bought. And we always get really fine ingredients. It's always been big for us, is to get highest quality we can get. So don't beat yourself up too much.
Thank you. I've never attempted like laminated dough, like a croissant, like to me that, or like a phyllo,
or like a baklava,
right? In tiramisu, I tend to avoid those more complex sort of layering things, but I have tried sourdough, and we can talk about that for a little bit. But first,
Wow.
yeah, I have a little story to tell you about that. Not sure if you'd be impressed if you tried my sourdough. I mean, it's edible, but again, I have issues with the rise, so it's, and sourdough is so hard to get. If you miss a step or if you're trying to rush it, you will not get the rise out of it. I spoke with Sarah Owens. She's a cookbook author, and one of her cookbooks is called Sourdough. So it's just loaded with, and it's really it's not a beginner sourdough cookbook. It's really for people who know what they're doing already, so that then you can improve and sort of mix it up a little bit. And I was, talking to her and kind of asking her kind of a how-to, and said, her interview was amazing. I love her. But I said, so Sarah, okay, so what if I don't have an organic heritage grain in my cupboard? What am I going to do? And so we had to almost stop the interview because she's like, well, you're just not going to make anything if you don't have organic heritage grains, because that's her big thing. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I totally respect that, but and it's piqued my interest, frankly. And just like you said, if you have maybe it's my ingredients. Maybe it's because I'm using this industrialized flour, which I've learned so much about because of Sarah. But what's the deal with, have you run into this, how passionate people can be about using real flour, and what is real flour versus what we buy from King Arthur?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's such a thing that is really coming out recently in the US because we've just been so used to commercial flour. And really that came out of industrialization, right? So if you kind of look back, like backtrack, or even now, if you go to Europe, if any of us been fortunate to go to Europe, go to France, you're like, why are these people, they're eating bread all the time? They're not fat. They look amazing. Like, what is happening? And it's because they are eating heirloom, real organic flour. Amongst other things, they're eating like real, grass-fed butter. Like organic is so big in Europe, and they have so many regulations. Here, we don't have that same thing, right? So, a long time back, they have cut wheat production so that they only do one type of wheat, and they cut it too short. They don't let it grow. And that's so that we can make more of it and you can make it faster. And then on top of that, you're putting it into all of these machines, and that's how we're making our bread now, right? So I think that's what she's also touching on, is like, we don't have this natural variety of wheat and flour like we used to, and like what they have in Europe. And so we have to really try to find that now, and it's hard.
It's harder.
It's
more
hard
expensive
to find it, and it's more expensive too. Baked goods are so different. It's not. It was never a push for us to use organic heirloom grains for our baked goods, but it does make such a big difference for the bread, for sure. So I'm still learning about it all the time too. It's fascinating because in the US, it's just not been a thing. And I think we're coming up on that. I think in the same way, circling back to way earlier in our conversation, third wave coffee being the big movement. I think that's where we're at with bread. We're at the very beginning of people really appreciating the difference between good bread and store-bought bread, just like they were interested in the difference between Folgers and spending a couple more bucks on a cup of coffee that tastes like coffee, that's ethically sourced, that the roaster, all of that. So that's where we're at with bread too.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to find someone who can talk with me about the science of like the digestion, the enzymes in the process, because frankly, there's a lot of, people, we know this from going through the election, and social media has a lot of bunk, and you can find really false stuff out there, people making claims, and the industry is trying to make money off of people. And Sarah makes a really good point, Sarah Owens. I'll have to dig it up and find it for people to put it into this episode. But just that there's sort of like, it's the gluten-free movement. She really came down hard on that movement, and how the corporations took advantage of people's fear.
Yes.
And really didn't educate them about, about really, how you can solve a gluten issue. And I certainly want to encourage people to realize that we're not doctors here. You should talk to a doctor, of course, if you're sick. But, that in some way we've been manipulated into this fad. I don't want to just call it a fad, because some people obviously it's a real medical issue, but there are simpler solutions upstream.
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating topic, and I'm sure she can speak much better than I can about this. But bread gets such a bad rep, for example, because they think gluten is bad for me. Gluten makes me fat. If you don't have celiac, if you're just like a normal person who can actually eat bread, and that's not true, especially naturally leavened bread actually has all these enzymes that are good for your digestion system. What really a lot of things that have caused gluten intolerance, from my understanding, in celiac has been how we produce bread in this country. That's why you don't see it so much in France and Europe, because they don't mill, they don't produce, they don't eat bread the way that we do here. So she's right. It's just such a movement of going back to how we did things for thousands and thousands of years, that people were not sick, because they did it right, and they were patient. And if you learn that while making your own bread, the patience you need to have, that is just not America, capitalist, consumerist, industrialized,
it's not Wall Street
country. No, because no one wants to wait 2 days to have a loaf of bread, Right.
But come to find out, people are interested in that weight, and people are getting sick and tired of getting sick, right? So they are like seeking out these recipes and finding ways to do it. My son has had severe nut and milk allergies. And that's a great example, classic example, because we've been fortunate to connect with doctors who have desensitized him.
Wow.
There's certain allergists out there that are doing this now. They've been doing it in Europe for a long time with food allergies, and introducing, rather than telling your patient you have to avoid this food for the rest of your life and sort of a life sentence, saying, no, actually, we're going to take the risk. We're going to put our license on the line and practice medicine and tell you to start eating this food that has the avoidance of which has caused the sickness. And so he's been free of peanut allergies, free of dairy allergies, and now we're working on all the tree nuts. And so
that's amazing. I've never heard of that before. That's so cool.
Yep.
And how much is that going to change his life? I just can't imagine.
I was in tears when this, and I want to interview this doctor as well sometime, because I know it touches the lives in profound ways of so many people. Because you first of all are anxious all the time about food, and food is the last thing we want to be anxious about. Just recorded an episode with a woman who wrote a book about eating disorders, but that's, food can take on such a kind of a battleground state in our psyche, because it is such a common thing, way in which we either soothe ourselves or frankly punish ourselves. And like she was talking about, the way in which food, whole eating can be really wonderful, and it's kind of past due time for us to be doing that in this country. But also, it can take on a sort of compulsive, bent to it. If like you won't eat unless you get that granola bar across, but you have to drive 10 miles to get it, or not going to bake bread unless you have a certain kind of flour. Well, wait a minute, like where can you live a whole life and still be kind to yourself and do the best, and also still try to make improvements? Great
so
discussion.
Interesting. I can't wait to listen to that episode. And we've always believed that, right? It's all about balance. Yes, we're selling sweets, we're selling but we are, baked joint, I think, is a really good example. We're doing the naturally leavened bread, but we're putting, we're making delicious, we have like cheese, we're getting organic eggs. You can still have like these yummy foods that taste good and balance it with good bread, and that's just how we, as a family, we eat.
Right.
Life is balanced for us. And we're happy.
Right. What's your favorite loaf of bread to grab from your store? I've got your menu here, and you've got a lot of different breads. You've got obviously the multigrain, the baguette, the country sourdough, cinnamon raisin walnut sourdough. That sounds amazing.
Wow. All of our breads serve such a different purpose depending on what I want to eat. But if I'm just going to rip it, open it, it's going to just be the country sourdough. It's the straight up sourdough. We spent so much time tinkering with that and making it the right sour taste, making it the right crunch on the outside, making it the right crumb on the inside. So I love that. I also love our pain de mie, which is like our version of. I grew up on Wonder Bread, if you can believe it, and as most and it's delicious. Let's just not beat around the bush. Wonder Bread is delicious. So it's our version
Fluffy.
of it's our version of a Wonder Bread. It's pain de mie, it's what the French call it. It's a white fluffy bread.
I think that's what I had. I had some peanut butter this afternoon. It was amazing.
Yes, exactly. Put some peanut butter on it, or we do our best-selling sandwich at Joint, and we have so many different types of sandwiches. It's funny enough, just the BLT, and it's done on this bread, and I think that's where the bread really shines. You're having just the bacon, lettuce, tomato, but you're having on the really yummy bread, and I love that bread as a sandwich bread. Yeah, those are probably my two go-tos, I'd say.
It was really delicious. And let me just talk about the quiche for a second. So I got
Let's talk about it.
the ham and cheese. You have to tell me again what it is. It's
Gruyere.
Gruyere.
Yeah,
I took French and I should know.
Yeah.
The ham and Gruyere.
Ham and cheese works too. Yeah,
Ham and
that's
cheese,
what it is.
but the crust. So I get the whole quiche, and it's not in a pie tin. It's just the crust is thick enough that it's holding itself together. That was amazing. Really good.
Yeah, I love our quiche. We actually do the same dough with that as we do our pie dough. And our pies are definitely famous during Thanksgiving. It was actually, originally what my mom was going to do with Baked and Wired was make pies. And that's it, because that's what she grew up making. That's a family recipe, that recipe we use for a pie dough. And it kind of evolved into offering more things. But with the quiche, that's the same dough we use. And we don't bake it in a pie dish. We do all of our pies in a glass Pyrex dish. But this we do more of like a traditional metal, like tart pan. So you're really getting those nice crunchy edges in there. And just load it up with cheese and ham and onion, and
it just melted. It was
that.
I just heated that up a little bit. It just melted, and it was delicious. Oh, we have to talk about your lemon Bluebee pound cake. You've invented a word here. I'm interested in the story because and you have to tell people about your blog where you write and some of these recipes.
Sure.
Got the recipe. Let me get this out here. But lemon Bluebee pound cake. So can you walk us through this? I mean, it's, you don't have to walk us through the whole thing, but just sort of generally overview, and then people can check this out.
Great. Yeah. Something I actually started in the fall was my own newsletter called the Sobremesa. Sobremesa is a Spanish term for the time spent at the dinner table. And there's not really, it's untranslatable. It's kind of this essence of I think we can all relate to. When you have a meal, you have your family, you have your friends, you have your partner there, and you finish eating and you're just hanging out the table and you're talking. That's when the best conversations are happening. That's when the jokes are made. That's when you're just sitting there getting into some interesting topic. And so I wanted to do a newsletter, especially during COVID, kind of relating this idea of food and human connection. And so growing up, in this world, I have all these recipes under my belt, but like I was saying, it's just so fun this year for me to really get in the kitchen and tinker it and make them a little bit my own. So we have tons of pound cakes at Baked and Wired. So I have the basic pound cake recipe that my mom actually started with, that she has substituted and made all of her different pound cakes with, just based on this one basic recipe. So I took that, and we do a lemon blueberry one as well, but I tinkered with it to make it my own a little bit. And in the Baked and Wired fashion, I like to rename it, make it fun, make it silly. How boring is lemon blueberry pound cake? Can we make it a little bit more fun to talk about and read and kind of make you smile? So
it's a fun word to say.
Yeah, it's just fun to say. It's fun to eat. And I love this pound cake because I actually love, of all the sweets I'm around, I actually tend to like things that are a little less sweet. So I like the pound cakes more. I like muffins. I like croissants. I like those sort of things a little bit more actually than cupcakes, than brownies. I don't have that intense sweet tooth. So I love these kind of cakes because they're more breakfasty. There's something I can have for breakfast or for dessert or with my afternoon coffee. I made this, I was fortunate enough to get away and go to Maine for a week, and they're known for their blueberries. I had all these blueberries on my hand. I didn't know what to do with it. And so I made a lemon blueberry pound cake with it. I took my mom's basic pound cake recipe and I just kind of played with it from there. And I made a lemon frosting, and because I was serving it for after dinner, but it's also still so good, with breakfast, and
sour cream.
Fun with
so
it.
That's going to keep it very moist, I imagine.
Exactly. So it's a very traditional pound cake where you're using sour cream as the moist, and it really adds that, you don't taste really the sour, but it really offsets the sugar in that way. Right. And I was using nice Maine wild blueberries, which are the little ones. And yeah, I love that recipe too. Thanks for checking it out.
Yeah, people should definitely check out your blog and look at all the recipes that are there. I think that's one of the pastimes people are clearly into because it's been so fun. You can see it on Pinterest or Facebook.
Yeah.
People sharing recipes and people talking about what they're doing. But this time, Tessa Velazquez, your family, as you're a co-owner with your family of Baked and Wired, and the other stores, La Betty and A Baked Joint in downtown Washington, D.C. Great to have you on The Soul of Life. I mean, I love your attitude, and it's just great. That's what this is about: bringing people together who have soul and are doing their work and finding some soul energy in the grind, literally. In your case, the coffee grind.
The coffee grind. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I love it.
Oh,
and,
thank
really
you, Keith. Thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this and getting the voice out there. It's we all need a little uplifting right now, so it's great. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thanks for listening to The Soul of Life. This is Keith Miller. Oh, and don't forget, please leave a thumbs up or a like for this episode wherever you're listening, so that others like you may find the soul of life. I mean, really, it's not every day you get to share the soul of life with someone. Okay, so you can post a comment or question on souloflifeshow.com. I'd love to hear from you, and please subscribe now to get the next episode. I look forward to sharing more of my soul of life with you.
I like it, and it's not harsh to my eardrum.
All right, I will go.
Pumpkin damn spice.